Al D from Orlando, Florida, born and raised. Went to college, I went to Morehouse College, majored in mathematics, went to the University of Pennsylvania, got a master's in education policy. In a couple months, I have a PhD in education policy. To me, dream, I guess I've always been probably a big dreamer. Like I think about, just growing up, I come from a family of educators as well as people that attended a lot of the historically black colleges and universities. So, a lot of my parents' friends, a lot of their grandparents, and a lot of my friends all were descendants of HBCUs. And I think probably as little as I was 5 or 6 when they would put me in the car and we would drive to Atlanta for Morehouse College homecoming, or drive all the way to Washington, D.C. for Howard's homecoming. I just saw that sense of community. So for me, college, it's something I probably dreamed about as far back as I can remember. And not only going to college, but going to an historically black college. And not only going to a historically black college, but going to Morehouse at Howard University. So the believe piece is key. I think you have to, everyone dreams, or if you're not dreaming, you should be dreaming, right? Like everyone should wake up with man, if things really go well for me, this is what I like to do, right? But then that's where the believing part comes in, right? You really have to develop a plan, right? And that's something that my parents always instilled in me growing up was, if there's something you want to do, growing up, it was never they told me I couldn't do it, right? So growing up, if I wanted to be an architect one year, we were fortunate enough to have a family friend that was an architect. So I would sit down and talk to him about various things, and he'd talk to me about how he was successful. If I wanted to be a fireman, same thing. We had firemen that we knew in the family. So for me, it's one of those things you really have to, really set out and stake out what it is you want to dream in, but then you have to really start to believe it. And the only way you can believe it is to actually see people doing it, or at least that's the way I conceptualize that. You first were able to dream it, right? Then you were able to map out a plan. And then knowing that plan's not going to go perfect, or there's going to be some bumps in the road. There's definitely going to be your fair share of adversity, right? So it's able to go through that adversity, learn from that adversity, and to actually accomplish something. And sometimes achieving something can come from failure. I think that those lessons have probably been some of the best lessons in life, when things maybe didn't work out how I had anticipated them to, and for me to really sit back and say, is this a dream I really want to fulfill? Do I really still believe, other people are telling me that I can't do this. Do I really believe that I can do this? And then really figuring out a plan to actually go back and achieve it. So I think of a failure that comes to mind, and I'll give you the backstory too behind that. I've always been good at math and sciences, and as a result, that made me pretty good at test taking as well. So I always was able to get, if they said you needed X score to qualify for a scholarship or some sort of enrichment program at the high school or middle school I was at, I always seemed to, at a minimum, get that score, but in some cases would do substantially better than that score, right? So when I thought about, going to college, I come from a middle class family background to where, money wasn't always, we didn't always have money, but we always had enough to, where lights cut on, and I didn't have to deal with any of those hardships, right? But when you think about paying for college, and Morehouse at the time was $20,000 a year. You do the math, 4 years, that's $80,000. That's just for you to be there. That doesn't talk about any other, the enrichment, anything else. So you might as well go and tack on just about another $20,000 and just call it a full 6 figures, right? There's no way my parents were going to be able to afford that. And I was doing well in school to where I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship. And in getting that scholarship, I majored in mathematics. And somewhere along the way, I realized, I was interested in some other things outside of math, but I stuck with math because I knew the financial burden it would have put on my family to switch majors. And, I probably didn't have the best study skills. I was one of those people that I could look at a book, could figure it out, and do well enough to keep that GPA for the scholarship. But the second semester of my junior year, I didn't do so well. And when I say I didn't do so well, I was in place to do well in those classes coming into those final exams. Because in a lot of college classes, you have a midterm, you have a final. So there's not those puff, homework assignments that you just get credit for just completion. There's not a quarter exam. There's not an exam every chapter. You really have to consume large amounts of information at one time. And I just remember saying to myself, into those finals, I always like to cram, and I've always been good at cramming. That's just the way of life for me. But on this particular week, I just had a bad week, and I didn't do well on any of those exams, even to the point where one class I had to repeat the next year. So I kind of knew that there was a potential of me losing that scholarship coming into my senior year, and then when those grades came out, I ended up having a less than 3.0 for that semester, and ultimately lost that scholarship coming into my senior year. Now, fortunately, because I had so many outside scholarships coming into that, and couple that with a small, federal student loan, my parents were able to support me to where I didn't, have to miss a semester because of school, because of financial reasons. But the lesson it taught me was that, cramming and maybe not preparing as well as, you're capable of preparing, the only one that loses in that situation is me. I have to be the person to have that discipline and to really apply yourself. So from that, I learned that, things can change real fast. And, back to, like I said, the believing aspect, you really have to have a plan. And sometimes your plan works, but it's still a terrible plan. So me, not studying, me, just showing up for exams, cramming the night before, pulling all-nighters, that was just the way I operationalized everything. So I think from there, I just tried to be more methodical and put in the necessary time, because when you look at a lot of people that have accomplished a lot of great things, they've put in that time. What I do realize is how I see myself and how sometimes others perceive me is totally different. I think for myself, I think I'm someone who's very caring about others, and I'm constantly concerned about other people. I know I also have kind of a rough exterior, or at least that's what I've been told. But I think I'm definitely someone that enjoys working with people and, doing what I can to help others. I like serving in an advisory role. People tend to lean on me for advice on an array of things, and that's not only friends, but it's also sometimes strangers that you might meet at the airport. Me, coming from a family of educators, education was always important. And I think, like I said, my mother, she was a social worker. My father, taught elementary school, taught 5th grade at the same elementary school for 30 years, yeah. So in my mind, tradition was big, and it just seemed like education was not only the family trade, but it was a big part of the tradition, not in terms of me always trying to do well in school, right? But also thinking about, how to, what I was going to do professionally. And, I fought that for a long time, because, you go away to college and you have these other influences by other people. When you go to a prestigious college or university, and I think a lot of the schools I've gone to, depending on what rank you want to look at it, all private and have their level of prestige. They tell you a lot of times there's only a certain couple of tracks for you. The biggest tracks are going to be the tracks that make the most money, and a lot of those tracks are business, law, and some of those other things. So I think for me, I think about a story where when I was getting ready to graduate from college, I worked with kids all the time. I tutored not only at a local community center, but I also tutored a lot of my friends who maybe struggled in math, right? And I remember saying to myself, what am I going to do when I finish? So went down like anyone else would do to the career services department, and our business school was really good at getting people jobs in the financial industry or in the business industry. So I had a job interview with the New York Stock Exchange, and so I did well through the interview process, where they even flew me up there, interviewed well. But when I left there, I kind of knew to myself, even if they did offer me this job, I didn't think it was the right career path for me. And the main reason why I didn't think it was a career path for me, because I just wasn't being honest or authentic to myself, right? I never once had a dream about, being in the financial industry. So why am I now pushing myself to this? And that's when I said, you know, like a lot of times influences, you have all these influences, and I don't think those people meant any harm with the influence that they were trying to project towards me, but I knew it wasn't authentic and real to myself. So, you know, I did what anyone would do, at least what I thought was right. I called the lady, the recruiter, and I thanked her for the opportunity, but I asked her to remove my name from consideration for the position. So she responded, well, why do you want me to remove your name? I think this is a job you really would be good at, and you know, we're prepared to potentially make an offer for you depending on a few things. And I told her, it's just not, I don't think this is the right opportunity for me. So then her next response was, well, what are you gonna do? I said, I don't know, I think I might teach. And she laughed at me. She said, you think you might want to teach, or you're not concerned about the money, and then someone with a math degree, there's all these other things you could be doing. And at that moment, that's when I said to myself, I'm doing the right thing. Like, hands down, I was never more committed to, you know, working in the field of education than at that moment. You know, so I moved back to Orlando, Florida. I taught middle school and high school for 3 years. And part of the reason why I wanted to be a teacher was because I didn't have an African-American male teacher until I got to Morehouse. And when I think about my graduate work, I never had an African-American male teacher. So for me to have had, I think it's important to have, you know, for students to see someone who looks like them. You know, whatever your background is, whatever you relate with, right? And that could come in a way of different shapes and sizes and various forms. But for me, especially for me to have a father who taught in the school system, and for me to, when I would go to the community center or go to a church event or just be out at the playground playing basketball in the neighborhood, people be like, oh man, that's your dad? Man. You know, the respect that the community had for my father, because he was one of the only African-American males teaching, but then definitely teaching elementary school. So for me, I kind of wanted to kind of follow down that same road, and then I knew I really understood math. I knew I was really good at teaching math, so it just made sense. For me, you know, I try to treat failure and success the same. And, you know, I think the advantage of me doing that is, you know, I never get too high off of this success, you know, and feel like the success is the say all be all, because, you know, there's always more work to be done. Now, what I forced myself to do in more recent times is to enjoy those successes, right? Because, you know, you put a lot of hard work into dreaming and conceptualizing something, to then finally seeing it through and then believing it, to then when you see the fruits of that labor and you're able to achieve something, that is a moment for celebration. Not only for yourself, but for the people that you care about, right? So I think I've become more judicious about doing some of those things, because I know in the past I probably haven't done that. So, but I still try to constantly always realize that, you know, things can change relatively quickly and circumstances can change relatively quickly. So to constantly push myself to be the best Al that I can be. For me, it was like I'm at home. You know, it was like this mythical place, you know, not only college, because college for me growing up, like I said, because it's something that my parents and a lot of family friends instilled in me at an early age, you know, so that in itself was like this dreamy kind of experience, right? But then to actually go to the school that I've been dreaming about for my entire life, because I have 2 uncles that went there, a couple cousins that went to Morehouse, and then the rest of my family went to Howard or Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida. It was like, you know, I made it, you know, like I'm here. You know, a lot of those imageries that you would see about, you know, historically black colleges through media and film, it was like there was that element of that as well. So it was just like, I finally felt at home, because I think being a African-American male coming through the, you know, the school system, a lot of the problems that we see now, those were the same problems that I saw when I was, you know, in middle school or in high school, you know, where constantly people challenging me or thinking that, you know, I was a problem, or that, you know, I maybe wasn't conceptualizing the work the way they wanted to. But when you look at my grades were always extremely high. You know, whereas Morehouse was a place that I went from honors classes where I might have been the only African American in a class to where now you have a class full of 30 African American males who are really intelligent, really bright, and it just felt like home. It felt like, you know, this is where, you know, I was destined to be. I had like, you know, I couldn't see myself anywhere else. So I would say some of the challenges that I dealt with in middle school and high school, I think to 8th grade, did extremely well on a lot of standardized tests we had at the time. So much so that there was a Duke program to where if you scored, you know, I think it was, let's say, the 90th percentile on any of these various standardized tests that you take in middle school, you know, they would pay for you to take the SAT, and if you scored at a certain point, you have no questions asked, full ride to Duke University. So I did always really well on the math test. That was the reason why I scored that high. I was on a math exam. And, you know, when it came time for recommendations for me to be in Algebra 1, which was, you know, ahead of the curve if you're in Algebra 1 in 8th grade, I remember my math teacher talking to my parents about it and saying he didn't recommend me, and it had nothing to do with academics, right? It had nothing to do with meritocracy. He said that I was a problem. So of course my parents being in education, so okay, what are you saying? What do you mean by problem? And when the teacher at the time unpacked that, there wasn't much substance to his argument. I was a student that had never been suspended. I never had a referral in my file, but yet I'm a problem. So it was one of them scenarios to where my parents pushed back, and I just remember having a conversation saying, you know, it just didn't make sense for me to be in this class. You know, I was one of those people that said, if he doesn't want me in the class, I don't want to be in the class either, because it's going to start impacting my ability to learn. Now, the only reason why that was a plausible strategy for me is because, remember what I said, I come from a family of educators, and one of my aunts was one of the best math teachers in the district. She taught 6 through 12 at an alternative school. And just like a lot of families, after school, I would always go to my grandparents' house until my parents got off work. And my aunt would be over there, and that was just a hub for my family as a whole, to where, you know, it was almost like kind of like a lot of the movies and stuff where you see like soul food and you see like this communal Sunday dinners over at grandma's house. Just imagine that almost every day, you know. So I still was learning Algebra 1 that year without being in that class. And I think for me that was the plan to work, because I know myself and I know how I kind of operate, and if he didn't want me in that class, I don't think I wanted to be in that class, right? So I went, got through that first year, and then took geometry in the summer so I could catch up with my peers, because I went to an engineering science and math and technology high school magnet program. And I think through that, that's where I definitely dealt with some adversity with that. And then the same thing more or less happened again, you know, in high school. You know, there was a pre-calculus class. I did fairly well in the pre-calculus class. And the same thing, I was a problem. And I just remember, here we go again. You know, I thought I had turned the corner on this. People doubting me, not based off of what I did in the classroom, but because of this other noise or other projections and stereotypes and biases that we all probably have. And it was just like deja vu. I remember having a conversation again with my parents, and you know, the teacher at the time said, hey, you're right, maybe I didn't see this through completely, and said, hey, you're more than welcome to join the class again. But once again, I said to myself, thanks, but no thanks. And, you know, I just kind of, with the help of my aunt, we just went through the calculus to where not only did I learn the calculus, but I also enrolled in a college algebra class to where, just in case I decided to stay in the state of Florida, I would have those college credits free of charge. So I thought that was also important as well. But then, like I said, once I got to Morehouse, all those things went away. You know, it was just a situation where people assumed that I was intelligent because I had a proven track record of success. And there just wasn't all these other things that I had to deal with that were kind of obstructive to, you know, me learning. So I think it's important to know yourself first, right? You need to know what excites you, what you're curious about learning more about, and ultimately what's going to make you happy. Because for me, I think when I've always taken a step back and thought about, what really matters to me, then I've been successful. But when I've tried to implement someone else's plan or a plan that didn't receive full buy-in from me, I haven't been successful. Now with that, you have to have, the only way you get buy-in is from knowledge. So I think about my upbringing, coming from a family of educators, it was always about, questioning sources of knowledge and really saying to yourself, why? Unfortunately, I grew up in a household where why was not only accepted, but it was anticipated. And, I'm sure that had a lot to do with everyone in my family was an educator and worked in the school system in some way, shape, or form. So for me, I think as long as, I've set out a plan and I truly believe in that plan, then I'm able to be successful. And I won't let anyone or be anyone to deter me from that, because at that point, I'm in control of the situation in terms of what knowledge I learn. Now, that doesn't mean that things are always going to go my way, but it means from the standpoint of you have to first believe in yourself for others to even have a chance of believing in you. Yeah. So for me, I think the why, it came up all the time. So I think about a scenario where, with my family, applying for colleges and going through that, very lengthy and stressful process. My parents were like, we really want you to invest a lot of time into applying for these scholarships. So much so to where if I wanted to go hang out with my friends or go to the homecoming dance or do whatever kids at that age range want to do, they were like, you're not going anywhere until you fill out these applications. So of course I was like, why? Why do these applications matter? Because I wasn't conscious of how much college costs, right? So that was when my parents really sat me down and talked finances and talked about how expensive the colleges and universities that I was interested in were going to cost. But then more importantly, the financial burden it was going to put on my family to have to pay for that stuff out of pocket. And then they really were honest with me and were like, you've worked so hard in school and you have the test scores, why would you not apply for these scholarships? So that was an example of where asking the question why, I became more enlightened. And it's good to get your sources from a multitude of places. So just being able to, have a family and a support system to kind of get that out of myself, that was tremendous. The advice I would give this 16-year-old version of myself is to be fearless about what matters to you. We all have a purpose. We all, are capable of doing, unbelievable things. But what stops us a lot of times is, it's not something you truly believe in, or even you're constantly questioning yourself. But then it's also, you just have to really invest in that and be able to roll your sleeves up, and when things get difficult, really work even harder to see things through. So I think the 16-year-old version of myself, I would tell myself to just work harder, just stay at it. Don't try to rely on your ability to do well on tests, or your ability to be charming, or your ability to, get people to be persuasive. Those are all great skills in and of themselves, but if you don't work hard, I don't know how sustainable those things are. And I think for me, when I've actually put in the work, that's when I've been the most successful. The biggest value for me is family first. My family has always meant a lot to me and always will, and from that, I've learned to, listen to them and seek advisement from them. But at the same time, we have an open dialogue to where I can ask why and question some of the things that they may say or think that I should be doing. But the family piece is the most important part, being genuine to yourself, and like I said, just a really good an authentic, work ethic. You have to work hard. Like there's no shortcut for that. Like if you really want to be successful at something, you have to put the work in. The most formative relationship I would have would be with my parents, because they brought so many different skills to the table. I think my mother was a great communicator. So from that, I kind of learned how to use my words and kind of learned how to be very persuasive on things. And she was constantly the one that would push me, to do as best I could on anything. Whereas my father, I think he definitely taught me how to be a man, what being a man looks like, and, how to kind of, just be that stoic force that when things get difficult, someone has to kind of take on that ownership. That's what I learned from my father. And more importantly, they both loved me unconditionally, but my father never told me, I've never disappointed him. There's never been a time in my life, no matter when I lost a scholarship or, when I maybe didn't do my homework on time or I maybe got a B in a class, my father has never been disappointed. And I think there's some good to that, but I also like the fact that my mother would always hold me accountable, right? And I think without that level of accountability, it'd be difficult for me to achieve some of the things that I've been able to achieve. So fortunately for me, I had kind of parents that kind of could balance that out. They were both there, they were both around, and they both brought something different to the table. And I guess I was smart enough to maybe capitalize and kind of embrace that difference that they both brought to the table. Well, I think the biggest thing is there's going to be naysayers, right? When I think about the middle school teacher that said I didn't deserve to be in the Algebra 1 honors class, or the high school teacher that said I didn't deserve to be in the calculus class. I could have fought them and exerted a lot of what I would call negative energy into that space in terms of, hey, I know I've earned this spot. But for me, what was important was the knowledge, because I knew if I learned those skills going in, from the Algebra 1, that made me more successful in high school. Then from the calculus, that made me more successful in college. And I think the biggest me showing them was to learn those things on my own. And I think, there's always going to be naysayers, right? There's always going to be people that are going to tell you, you can't do something, you can't do this, you're never going to be able to accomplish that. And, if you don't really believe in yourself, if you don't really dream that you're capable of that, they're probably going to deter you from achieving those things. So for me, I think the biggest thing that I learned from all those scenarios is, take some ownership in your own learning. And in taking ownership in your own learning, if you learn the material, you know the material, then that'll be the biggest victory. So it wasn't about letting someone else define my success. It was about me taking ownership on what I define as successful and kind of building in those necessary steps to be that. Oh, yeah, I think going back to my parents, they always taught me if you really want something, you got to speak up for yourself. You have to be an advocate. So one day when I was teaching Algebra 1 in high school, and I just remember just not being as happy as I was the first 2 years of me teaching. And it had nothing to do with the kids. It had a lot to do with the policies in place. It had a lot to do with the adults in the work environment. So I said to myself, I've always been inquisitive. I always like to, if I feel a certain way or if I want to learn something, I'm going to explore that, right? So in this case, what I decided to do was I decided to research, and learn about why teachers leave the profession in terms as it relates to turnover, as it relates to job satisfaction. So I stumbled upon this professor who was world-renowned, and especially a heavyweight in the academy. And a lot of the stuff that he wrote about really spoke to me. And they were heavy on the quantitative side, the articles, and because I had a math degree, it was easy for me to kind of understand the statistics and the quantitative nature of the studies. So on his website, he had his phone number, and it was his work phone number. So I was sitting around after work one day. I decided to just call him. I said, maybe he answers, maybe he doesn't. But after reading his article, things really made sense to me. So I called him, he answered, I told him who I was, I told him what I was doing at the time. I told him I was interested in graduate school, and University of Pennsylvania was one of the graduate schools that I was interested in applying to. And we had this great exchange back and forth for about 30 to 45 minutes. So at the end of the conversation, he said, I really think you should apply to this master's program. He's like, really, I think you should apply to the PhD program, but that window has passed. But if you're interested in graduate school, I definitely think you should apply to the master's. So I applied. 2 weeks later, I was accepted, into their education policy program, and 3 months later, I moved to Philadelphia. So I think you have to always be flexible, and nimble, and seek on new challenges. But me always thinking about that and always speaking up for myself, that's same thing my parents always instilled in me. I think about a situation, with the scholarships. I applied for all those scholarships, was able to get a lot of local scholarships, mainly because no one applied for those scholarships. In some cases, I got the first, second, and third place prize because there was no one else to make the minimum requirement. So I would definitely tell people and parents, look at your local scholarships. Of course, the big foundation scholarships that are national competition, of course apply for those as well. But there's a local scholarship from various fraternities and sororities, various civic organizations. Those are some of the scholarships that I think a lot of times get swept under the rug, and maybe people don't apply to them because they're just maybe not knowledgeable about them. So when I first applied for these colleges and these scholarships and X, Y, and Z, first got accepted into Morehouse. Morehouse gave me, Howard University. And Howard University gave me a substantial scholarship, full tuition and room and board. So basically all I had to come up with fees and books. So my mother said, well, if Howard University is going to give you that, what do you think about us calling Morehouse, talking to the people in admissions, and telling them how much you really want to go to Morehouse instead of Howard, but because of financial reasons, you'll have to go to Howard. So my mother called and had a great conversation with someone in admissions, and within a couple weeks, they said, hey, we're going to give you this tuition scholarship. There's another scholarship that we think your son would be great for. It was a scholarship in the math and sciences. It was called the Ronald A. McNair Scholarship. And I applied for that scholarship. My mother talked to the lady that ran that program, and within a couple months, I now had a full scholarship, including room and board, including fees, and even including books, and even a paid internship at Kennedy Space Center for every summer until I graduated. So it's one of those situations, people are fearful, I think, a lot of times of taking that, that first step and really communicating to people what it is you want in life. And no one can help you better than you being able to explain what you want to do. And along that way, being open to people helping you, that's what I think has worked well for me. I definitely think luck has something to do with it. I'm not one of those people that thinks that, there's no fate or path or whatever you want to say, or whatever you believe associated with that. But I also think there's a big part of preparation. You have to prepare yourself for when opportunity presents itself, right? So the only way you're going to be able to accomplish things is when I talked about, the biggest thing is knowledge, right? Learning, knowing what it is that you want to learn out of that situation, and really mapping out a plan to where eventually opportunity knocks, and then you just bust that door open. So no, it's not traditional, and I think a lot of stories aren't traditional. But what I will say is that I think if people, open themselves up and are not afraid of failure, because all those people that have helped me along the way, they could have said no. I would have found someone that said yes. And if that would have meant me talking to 1,000 people, then it would have meant me talking to 1,000 people. Fortunately for me, in some cases it took 5, sometimes it took 10, and sometimes I'm still in situations in life, goals and things I want to accomplish where I still haven't found someone to say yes. And that's okay, because that's like the beauty of learning and about setting out goals and actually trying to achieve those goals. So for me, I try to, when the going gets tough, I try to just dig down deeper. So kind of use the sports analogy, because I'm heavy into basketball. I love basketball. I have no problem taking the last shot because I put the time in and the preparation to take the last shot. But I also am okay with passing the ball to the guy that makes the last shot too, because that's also part of it too, being a team player and recognizing that, you know, you want to make the best decision, not only for yourself, but for the various groups and interactions with people that you may have. My friends would say that I am very passionate. And I think sometimes that passion comes off as maybe that I'm a little angry, or, you know, fill in another word to describe someone from that perspective. But I'm very direct. And that directness is just because my mind is moving so fast that I'm really just trying to, you know, get to the bottom line. But the passion, there's a fire burning in me to, you know, to give back, you know, and I think you have to be relentless in that. You know, I have to incessantly push myself to be a better Al. Because if I'm a better Al, then I can help people even more than I am. So definitely people would say that I'm authentic. My friends would say that I'm very authentic and very passionate, which sometimes, you know, rubs people the wrong way, but, you know, they know my heart's in the right place. I hope the world remembers me for, you know, my ability to help others, you know, so that someone watching these videos from In My Shoes can really, you know, not come down my path, to take my path and flip it on its head and do what I've done even better, you know. But I think I wouldn't be where I am without other people taking the time to share their story and what worked well for them. And that's what it is for me. You know, it's not about, you know, accolades, and, you know, I don't wake up thinking like, well, I've done all these great things for myself. You know, I constantly tell myself, how can I help, you know, people that maybe didn't have some of the great resources I had growing up. And I think by telling my story and by getting other people on tape to where we can give them an opportunity and a platform to tell their story, there'll be a small kid out there in middle school who was going through the same thing that I was, where they were doing well in class, and you know, the teacher told them that they weren't academically fit to be in this class, that they won't accept that, and that they'll continue to work hard and continue to, you know, gather knowledge any way, shape, or form. What about the world keeps me up at night? I think the biggest thing that keeps me up at night is the fact that, you know, the imagery and the projection of African Americans, and more specifically African American males, is very troubling. And for me, that was never an issue because, you know, me being an African American and both of my parents going to college, and a lot of their family members and friends went to college, you know, I've always seen blacks, African Americans, doing extremely well professionally and just being good human beings, right? So for me, I realized in a lot of my work when I was teaching and a lot of other community work that I've done throughout the years, you know, there's not a lot of hope. And I think when people aren't dreaming, when I would sit down with, say, an 8-year-old and they don't have a dream or an aspiration to go to college or to learn something, right? To be a lifelong learner, that, you know, that just breaks my heart. You know, so for me, I think that we need more, you know, real role models. And I think we have them out there. We just need a platform to kind of bring that to light. And I think, you know, people sitting down with people that have been very successful and kind of tapping into what was in that secret sauce to kind of made them successful, and showing them that, hey, doesn't matter what your walk of life is, you know, your challenges are your challenges, but there's someone else out there who's dealt with something similar to that, and don't use that as an excuse or a reasoning or a rationale for why you can't still accomplish the things you want to accomplish, whatever it is. Like, the world is boundless. Opportunities are always out there. You just have to really sit down and, one, like I said, dream it first, right? But then really after you dream it, then taking it down and saying, how can I believe this is something I'm willing to put the energy and efforts into, and then just seeing it through and achieving it. Hard work, because without hard work, you know, it's not sustainable. Hard work is the only thing that's gonna make something sustainable. Opportunity, you need help from others, and that opportunity is gonna come in a way, shapes, and forms, and opportunity may not come when you expect it to come, but that's why I say the hard work. I think if you work hard, you're always prepared for that next opportunity. And then authenticity. I think about a lot of what has worked well for me is I like going against the grain. And part of the reason why I like going against the grain is because I like to ask questions. And a lot of times, a lot of things people believe and say, this is the way you should do it, or this is the only way we're going to value success. When you peel back that onion and you ask them some really hard questions around that, they don't have much to say. It's just, well, this is the way things have always been done. This is the way I was taught that it was done. So I think growing up in a household where it was not only embraced but expected for me to question everything that was being presented towards me, and not saying that I didn't believe it, but 2 + 2 does equal 4. We know that, right? But a lot of things, there's more nuances and more gray area to it than we maybe sometimes give credit to. Powerful when I'm able to help others. I don't really like attention. So a lot of times where I've been able to help people, it's kind of been behind the scenes, or randomly. I think about a conversation I had with a middle schooler on the train. Just talked to them about what they were interested in, and just gave myself a resource, and kind of also, shared as many things as I possibly could with them. So I feel most powerful when, there's not these barriers between me and me helping someone else. To help at least one kid. If we are able to help at least one child who comes from a situation where, they're just not dreaming, therefore they don't believe things, and then they obviously won't achieve something that you're not even conceptualizing, just one child, then it was all worth it. Because that's one more person that other people can then turn around and look at, and can really look at and say, wow, I see some of myself in them. And like I said, I just grew up around a lot of fantastic human beings. And the biggest thing that I learned from them was just me hearing about their story, and kind of just when things went really well for them and when things didn't go so well for them. So if we can just help one child, achieve their lifelong goals, or get them started on achieving their lifelong goals, everything was worth it. Yeah. So I think for me, the biggest thing related to the process was, like I said, growing up in a household where education, it wasn't a matter of if I was going to go to college, which college I was going to go to. My parents, I participated in a lot of extracurricular activities that were kind of related to college access and college readiness, whether it was Upward Bound, whether it was the local University of Central Florida, where I'm from in Orlando, had various enrichment programs for middle school and high school students, to where you actually would get an opportunity to go stay on the college campus for, let's say, 2 weeks at a time. You kind of would have a schedule very similar to what it would be like in college, and it gave you an opportunity to be around other kids who were also interested in college. So for me, my parents tried to make sure I was involved in as many extracurricular, as many programs that were aligned with, the perception or the perspective of me going to college. And I think that had a tremendous effect on me, because, it's a lot of things are learned behavior. So just me being exposed to that on a consistent basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, just that level of persistence, made it to where it almost came off as second nature, to where it was almost a matter of doing. And then when I think about middle school, some activities that I think that supported that, I was on various quiz bowl teams, because I was always good at memorizing information. I was on various academic enrichment programs, and whatever program there was to where I could learn more about anything, whether it's math, science, engineering, I always gravitated to those. And, you know, whereas my brother, he was more interested in the liberal arts stuff, so my parents supported him in that area. So it really just boils down to knowing what you really are interested in and what you want to spend your extracurricular time on, and then just really finding a program that aligns to that. And I think like there's a lot of great programs. Like I worked with Upward Bound, I worked in, you know, Mathletes was another local program that I worked in. So you name it, I probably spent some sort of time in those programs. You know, Jack and Jill, I think through that I learned a lot of social skills. Well, I think I relied on a lot of the adults that had done it before me. And my parents as well as myself, we, you know, would seek out people that had that type of expertise. I think my guidance counselor played a meaningful role in that. And then because I had parents that actually were familiar with that process, it was helpful and it was easy for me to kind of navigate through that process because I had someone that kind of would show me the ropes. And I think that's where another benefit of In My Shoes is, you know, when you really look at our curriculum and we really look at some of the things that we laid out, we're able to walk someone through that process. And I think that process involves, you know, a lot of project management skills and a lot of timelines. There's deadlines that you're going to have to meet, and then it's just working back and thinking about how much time it's going to take you. I know for me, writing was something that I struggled with when I was in high school, to where it would take me a longer time to write. So I know I would build in, you know, extra weeks to make sure I could get a product out that would tell my story as best that I could.